meeting of the Climate Action Committee to order at 7:01.
Member Bierce?
Here.
Member Hodges?
Here.
Member Larson is absent. Member Lieberman is also absent. Member Melgen?
Here.
Member Rose Shears is also absent. And Chair Vahil McClanahan.
Here. All right, we're going to read the land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. Next, we'll go to approval of the minutes from March 19th. Any comments on the minutes? Or questions about the minutes? And is there any public comment on the minutes?
No public comment.
All right. I move that we approve these minutes from March.
Second.
Member Bierce?
Yes.
Member Hodges?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Chair Vahil McClanahan.
Yes. Now we're going to public comment for any item not on the agenda for tonight.
Lucinda Young, go ahead. Hold on just one sec, Lucinda.
Lucinda, can you speak now?
Yes.
There we go.
Can you hear me? Yes, I just wanted to mention that a few weeks ago, it was on March 30th, the Albany Climate Action Coalition held their second sustainability presentation at the Albany Library, and it went very well. The topic was plastics, impact on health and climate. We want to thank Michelle for attending the presentation and speaking to the audience about the new Sustainable Foodware Ordinance. We had about 40 members of the public that came to that presentation. And the next presentation is planned, I wanted to give a heads up, is planned for May 25th, and the topic will be native plants. I'm actually not organizing it, so I may not have the exact title. I think it's still being worked out. But it will be on native plants, as well as Albany's street tree program. Still trying to get speakers together for that. It's being organized by ACAC member Jean Wu, so we will provide more details once it's organized. Thank you.
No other public comment.
Thank you, commenters. All right, we're going to hop right to our first presentation. Item 4.1, the Street Tree Management Plan.
And for all those that are confused, the announcements has been moved to the end of the agenda now, just in case you're wondering. So we will get there. But we're going to move into Street Tree Management Plan, and I'll just let Jeff introduce himself.
Great. Jeff Bond, I'm the Director of the Community Development Department, and I'm happy to be back with the committee this evening to talk about the Street Tree Management Plan. I'm going to share this presentation with Benji to kind of split it up in two different parts, so you don't hear just me droning on. This is a kind of a progress update for you. We have now, with our consultant team, for an internal draft at least, to have an internal working draft of a report And what we're doing this evening and what we did last week with the Parks Recreation Open Space Commission is giving you some of the highlights of what we plan to put in the report and getting some reactions to some of those highlights. And we've got some good feedback already from the Parks Recreation Open Space Commission that we can build back in that we didn't have. So looking forward to some feedback from you this evening as well. And then planning to do some community outreach in May and have the public draft available in May as well. And hopefully get close to bringing this to the City Council in the summer, hopefully if everything goes smoothly. So as I mentioned, Benji and I are going to share the presentation. I'm going to hand it over to him for the first part, and then I'll pick it up when he's finished.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Excuse me. Yeah, like Jeff said, this presentation is sort of a culmination of the points that the consultants have done thus far, Daria and Ryan with Port Science and Bartlett Consulting. So this presentation was prepared mainly by them and then paraphrased for you guys by us this evening. So to begin, we're going to go over basically a refresher on chapters 1 through 4, which is what was presented back in, I believe it was November to the CAC. And then from there, go into the newly developed, drafted, back and forth revised Chapter 6. Chapter 5 isn't really going to be addressed in this presentation as it covers mainly community perspectives as opposed to goals and the actual plan itself. So to hop right into it with a refresher, just to renew your awareness, Chapter 1 has to do with the introduction in the context of the street tree management plan as a whole. Chapter 2 refers to the City of Albany, the different factors that are being considered when thinking about the street tree plan. Chapter 3 has to do with more of that scientific analysis of the urban forest assessment of Albany in a way that would then inform goals and strategies. And Chapter 4 dives into current tree management and protections within the City of Albany. Very first off, in reference to the street tree management plan, when it comes to the vision and mission, there is a vision statement, a mission statement, and a goal statement within the street tree management plan. And these were written by the consultants in conjunction with city staff. So first off, vision statement: the City of Albany will strive to protect and grow a healthy and diverse street tree population and expand the street tree canopy as an essential social, environmental, economic, aesthetic, and community asset to enhance the quality of life for current and future generations. The mission statement, a little bit longer, is the City of Albany is committed to a sustainable future. These sustainability goals will be supported through the protection and growth of trees in the public right-of-way. The city will strive to ensure that the benefits are equitably distributed throughout the city and are maintained to optimize benefits. This optimization is realized through actions taken by staff to maintain a healthy and expanding tree canopy. The inherent risk street trees present will be managed to a level that is reasonable, practical, and proportionate. Albany staff, in coordination with the community, will implement the management program. And finally, when we think about the overarching goals, the goal statement is to optimize the sustained benefits, aesthetic, environmental, etc., of street trees while reasonably, practically, and proportionately managing their inherent risk, consistent with the industry best management practices and scientific research, cost-effective technologies. So moving on to a brief overview of chapters 1 through 4. Chapter 1 was that introduction and context, so it begins with a broad understanding of what an urban forest is, the benefits that can come from an urban forest, such as ecosystem services, social sustainability, economic sustainability, and equity. And then moving past that, it dives more into the detail of why a street tree management plan specifically. Within the realm of an urban forest, why is a street tree plan something that's important, something to consider, something to be aware of, and so dives into the definition of that street tree plan as trees growing in the public right-of-way, and more of an in-depth understanding of the tree resource, so that way as we move forward, it's easier to understand how to manage it. Chapter 2, the City of Albany. This is based on understanding the land, breaking down the 14 neighborhoods of Albany, looking into how the city is distributed as a whole. So elements such as where is it mostly developed, what are mostly residential areas, and this is done through connections with other city planning. And it brings in other elements of city planning such as the general plan and the climate action and adaptation plan, and thinking about how the street tree management plan affects and delivers products that are based in those two broader city-based plans. Chapter 3 is that more scientific analysis, the iTree canopy cover assessment, which was a project in determining what the current cover, canopy cover within the city is and what that cover is made up of, as well as an inventory analysis and an ecosystem service analysis. So a lot of analyses in this chapter, trying to understand exactly what we already have, what the benefits and different considerations involved are. And so with that, we have this land cover assessment. And as you can see, this is in the report, but as a refresher, the street tree canopy coverage is the second lowest land coverage or land cover within the city of Albany, right above water, such as streams. So emphasizing why there is a gap in what we have and what we desire to have in reference to those general plan and CAP as a whole brought up in chapter 2. And then finally, chapter 4, current tree management and protections. This has to do with how trees are maintained currently in the city, getting an understanding of what are the systems in place? What do we do as a city right now with the trees that we already have? So that way, as we move forward, we understand where are there areas for improvement, such as thinking about the reactive tree maintenance model versus the proactive model, and then getting that benchmark of where we stand right now, and doing comparative analysis with other cities, other programs that would then enable us to develop our own plan that would be the most successful within the context of Albany itself. That says questions, but I do believe we'll hold all those till the end. So yeah, over to you, Jeff.
Great, thank you. So as Benji mentioned, this is looking to change how we approach dealing with street trees, and to modernize our management practices and to move from a reactive stance to a proactive stance in terms of dealing with our street trees. This table is really the heart of, from our perspective, the heart of what will be the ultimate recommendations. It's still a work in progress. I will go through some of the highlights here in the next couple of minutes, but I can tell you that, for example, the very first key point of planting 150 trees or more per year, thanks to some comments we got from the Parks Commission the other night, we're going to redo that math a little bit. We were just talking about it with the consultant a couple hours ago, and that number will be higher, so that we're making sure that we're not only maintaining the 5,000 or so trees that we have, the number of trees that we have, but that we're growing it to hopefully a target of at least 6,000 trees. And ultimately, the goals that are driving this are certainly the climate action plan, but also the livability of the city, some of our other plans in terms of the aesthetic appearance of the city, and active transportation as well. So if you go on to the next slide, I'll start with that first goal. The first major goal is to grow a healthy, extensive, and vibrant and diverse street tree population, and to provide 5% canopy cover by 2050. And currently, we are at about 4%. So it's a 20% increase. The reality of street trees, or of any tree, of course, is they come and go, and they have a life of, I understand, on average, about 25 years. So not only do we have to plant trees just to keep up with the normal lifespan of a tree, but to grow the canopy, we have to be more aggressive about that. And we have to navigate the complexities of our streets. Our streets do a lot of different things. They're not just what's on the surface of pavement and sidewalk, but there are electrical lines and communication lines above ground. There are at least 4 or 5 different pipes and lines, sewer lines, water lines, gas lines, storm drains that are underground, and trees need to be able to fit into that maze. It really is a maze, to be able to be successful and be placed in the right location. And then there is just navigating climate change. One of the interesting points that our consultant made the other night is that the climate in Albany is predicted, is no surprise to this committee, is changing. It will change, and that essentially the climate that we can expect in Albany, according to the University of Maryland work, is what you see today in the city of Pomona in Southern California. That's San Bernardino County, if I remember correctly. So we're planning for San Bernardino County today in many respects, rather than what we have today in our more temperate climate. Next slide, please. So some of the key points of being able to achieve this objective of growing the urban forest is, as I mentioned, planting at least 150 trees a year. That will increase, and it will address both the trees that are safety risks. There are certain species, probably 300 or 400 species trees that are recognized as either dropping limbs or lifting sidewalks, and we'd like to evolve away from those trees so that we're not chasing problems all the time. There are also trees that approximately, as I understand it, and I should have prefaced the beginning, I'm not an arborist. I'm not a professional in this field. We're just kind of giving you an update, but what I've learned is about 20% of the trees that are newly planted are not successful for a variety of reasons, and so we should expect to have to replace some newly planted trees. And then there are some trees that have reached the end of their life. They don't live forever. And then there are the trees that we want to grow to expand the canopy. So there's a lot of moving pieces to that, and it's going to take more than 150 trees a year to achieve our goals. And to go along with that, and this is why it's called a management plan, is we really need to have a sustainable financial footing for this program. It's more equipment, it's figuring out how we're going to water the trees, it's more personnel to manage the trees. One of the things that we think we can do much better is have a proactive pruning program where we're not reacting to something that we see, but they call it a grid pruning program, where we intentionally go down, cover a particular segment of the city every year, and visually inspect every tree. Maybe it's just a few little snips in terms of tree trimming, but we're hitting all those very systematically. It's far more cost effective. You don't have to move the equipment around quite as much. You can, if you just park in the middle of the block and you hit all the trees in the street, you can get a lot more done than if you're bouncing around town from one place to another during the day. So that grid pruning program is one of the things that we think will help keep trees healthy and help us be more cost effective. Then finally, to have a planned progress check-in in two different ways. One is to check in with city commissions. It'll probably be the Parks Commission, but it could be this commission as well. Roughly annually, to say, here are our numbers, this is what we've accomplished so far, we're achieving our goals or we're not achieving our goals. And then have, particularly as technology evolves, have citywide canopy evaluations done roughly every 10 years. We would expect that 10 years from now, there's better satellite technology and better software technology to measure these things. And we might be able to refine our program as we get better information. Next slide, please. The next thing, already mentioned that planting trees that are going to be successful in our changing environment. We recognize the importance of natives and want to try to keep as many natives as we can, as long as they're natives that will continue to be successful in the area and support our goals, to support the wildlife that we want to encourage in the community. As part of that, we would probably be changing how the decision-making process that we have for for selecting trees. As it stands now, our arborist will engage with the resident, or the property owner that lives in front of a tree or lives behind a tree, and ask them what kind of tree they want. And we would probably want to be a little bit more directive under this program, where we would certainly want to still engage with people, but if they want a tree that maybe is not appropriate or doesn't help achieve our objectives, we might want to push back a little bit more than we would be doing currently. Maybe we want bigger trees. Maybe we want trees that are a greater variety in different locations. So that will be a change in our approach to this. Next slide, please. And the other part of this is to clean up our municipal code and to look at having the city have a little bit more authority and responsibility for maintenance. We're in a place today where the municipal code says basically the adjacent property owner is responsible, but the reality is when something happens to a tree and it causes damage or injury, the city ends up paying the claim, the insurance claim that comes with that incident. And so it seems to us that if we're ultimately on the hook for not only achieving our policy goals, but also financially when trees are not maintained properly and cause damage or injury, we ought to take more proactive control over the tree itself. We also want to revise the process of making decisions over street trees and deciding when trees need to be removed, particularly safety related. Right now, there's kind of an extensive process that goes through the Parks Commission that's appropriate for non-safety related removals, but for safety related removals, there are best management practices and standards of the profession, the arborist profession. We think those should be used by professional arborists to make those decisions. And that allows us to move more quickly and more consistently. And the criteria can be subject to public discussion and revision, but once the criteria are set, we want to be able to move a little bit more quickly. And then I mentioned the proactive pruning and inspection cycles that we would have, with the idea of probably every 5 years taking a look at every street tree in the city, doing the necessary pruning and inspections if we see some issues arising. Next slide. And I mentioned, this is kind of, some of these slides are a little bit repetitive, I apologize for that, of codifying some of these standards right now. Some of them are just kind of I wouldn't say informal practices, but undocumented practices. And having that as a written program that will be included in the plan that you'll see in a month or so, I think is going to help give everybody some comfort that we've got a plan and we're executing that plan, and they can have it, and people can have a chance to comment on that. Next slide. The other thing that has come up is protections for private trees. And to be perfectly honest with you, I came into this with some hesitation about taking this task on. And I still have some. I think it is a challenging decision-making process for people who have private trees that they want to remove. In some cases, there are legitimate reasons for that, whether they're damaging the property. Again, the same safety and damage thought process that we would go through in a street tree, a private property owner might go through. And there's also situations where people want to expand their home or build an accessory dwelling unit or something like that, that would they have space conflicts that are going to be challenging to resolve. Nonetheless, we recognize that this is a discussion that needs to be had publicly about the merits of that and the challenges of it. I know from other cities, they don't work very well. Private tree ordinances don't seem to work very well, but that is not a reason not to talk about it. So that will be part of, it's not part of we won't be trying to reach any conclusions about private trees in this report, but we will be opening up the discussion with this report, and in a separate process in the near future, we'll explore the private tree ordinance idea. Next slide. The other thing that we are anxious to do better is have a more consistent engagement with people in the community. There's already people who've reached out to me and to others who are really interested in what we're doing, and we want to build those partnerships in whatever way we can, and want to make that as part of kind of the community building process that you can't really get excited about community building for repaving a street or fixing a sewer line, even though those are important things, but you can without a street tree. So we want to engage and use this as a community building opportunity, as well as getting the benefit of expertise in the community. Next slide also goes a little bit more into this with a more consistent public outreach program that celebrates our accomplishments when we have them, and if necessary, acknowledge where we haven't had success, and be a little bit more transparent about that. And building out our webpage. We do have a new city webpage, by the way. So it's still a little bit of a work in progress. Don't go too deep into it yet. We're all fixing it, but in a few months it will be dialed right in, and we'll have an opportunity to really build out the capacity for people to see what's going on. Next slide, please. And then finally, there are things just to be able to celebrate accomplishments. There's the Tree City USA program by the Arbor Day Foundation, which is just one of, I think, a couple of different, maybe the largest one, but one of different programs that just set some standards for communities that we can strive to be to meet and meet their criteria and be part of a greater community of cities that are trying to do the same thing. Something is beeping over here. I apologize. I don't know what that is. I don't know if you hear it. I wanted to mention this slide is a little bit out of place. I apologize. We were just moving this around at the last minute, but to talk about this tree removal criteria, because this is one of the touchier subjects that people have when we talk about street trees. And we want to really have good reasons to remove a tree that is currently within the city inventory. The first, obviously, is if it's not alive. Remove the tree, plant a new one. The second one is the safety issues, where we would be evaluating using the best practices of the profession, the scoring systems that they have and if it's a tree that is at high risk or extreme risk, we believe we should remove it and plant a new tree that will, in the future, be less risky and do all the good things that growing trees do for us. The third is to be a little proactive when we can, and if we see a tree that maybe is not quite a high risk or extreme risk, but is clearly not going to be successful for long, we may want to consider removing those trees and being proactive about it so we get to it before it drops a limb. And if it's clear that it's not going to be a successful tree, get a good tree in there when we can. And then avoid the planting of invasive street trees using, again, industry standards for that determination. And then, yes, this is the final slide I wanted to go through. I think it's almost the final slide. There are a few things that we've heard in some of the engagement already that we wanted to talk a little bit about and just acknowledge and let you know you'll see more about this in the report. There is, and I don't think I'll attempt to read all of these, but just kind of highlight a couple of them that I haven't already mentioned. The first is to, I haven't mentioned anything about water use. Obviously, we live in an era where we're going to be having periodic droughts, and so having species that can survive, if not thrive, in a low water situation. That would be important. We want to develop a program where we have the capacity to irrigate newly planted trees. As I understand it, the single most important thing we can do to a newly planted tree is water it. And right now, we rely on people living nearby to run their hose out there or a bucket or something, and we think a more consistent watering program will help keep those trees growing and thriving. The other thing that I wanted to mention that I think has come up in some of your meetings is to make sure that we have trees that are aesthetically appropriate and that support other species that need a healthy tree canopy to survive. And so to do this with some thoughtfulness that ensures we're trying to do the best we can to make this a diverse ecology as we can for a city as dense as Albany. Next slide, please. And then back to the final point is this is ultimately going to cost money, and exactly how we're going to pay for that, we haven't quite gotten to the dollar amount, so we haven't quite gotten to what the financial strategy will be. But I think it's fair to say that it will certainly exceed the current resources that are applied to street trees. It may require some outside funding sources that we don't presently have. And this, from kind of a city management perspective, is very important, because just having the aspiration to do something without the financial resources is really frustrating. It's frustrating for us as city staff people that we're not accomplishing what we want, and it's frustrating all of you because we're not achieving the goals that have been set for us. So making sure that we have enough money to do what we want to do, and make sure we're doing it in a way that is using benchmark of other cities, that we're being cost effective about it, so we're not throwing money away. And part of what you'll be seeing in this report is some benchmarking against other similar cities to see how much money they're spending and what their program is, and applying it to the scale of Albany. So final slide is the list of our consultants, Daria Barar and Ryan Suttle. They are with a firm called Bartlett Hort Consulting. They're arborists, and they have, between the two of them, many decades of experience in urban street trees. And they pretty regularly come to Parks Commission meetings, and are also available if you had any questions you wanted to direct to them directly. Their emails are here, or you can email Benji or I and Michelle, and we can forward it on to the two of them for specific responses. So that's my presentation. Thanks for your patience as I kind of ran through that. And if you have questions, I'll try to answer them. If you have comments for us, that would be great. We will carry that back to the team as they're doing their edits and cleanups of this rough first draft that we have. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much to Jeff and to Benji for that. Any questions on the committee?
Question for Jeff. Great presentation. Thank you so much. Curious to know if the Lishan tribe was consulted about the tree plan, or that's a plan for future consultation?
We have, on this particular plan, we have not. We do engage with them on other plans at various times. It's a good point that this is probably when the draft comes out, we should definitely provide them with a copy, and look forward to their comments. Thank you.
Excuse me. Is the flammability of trees a factor that should be considered at all?
Absolutely. At this point, we don't have a discussion about that in the draft. So obviously, we live in a fire-prone area, so I think that's a good comment, and I think we should add at least some degree of analysis.
I'll just mention, I have a lot of juniper next to my house, and I was shocked that In Boulder, Colorado, they refer to junipers as gasoline bushes. They're so flammable. The other question I have is PG&E has an active vegetation management program, and are you interfacing with PG&E somehow?
We are not yet interfacing with PG&E. Our consultant teams have a lot of experience with PG&E. That's one of the criteria that we would be looking at in terms of the types of trees and where they get planted. For example, they've talked about larger trees really shouldn't be planted underneath high voltage utility lines. So usually the high voltage lines are on one side of the street, and then the lower voltage lines that drop down to each single family home. So we would be planting the bigger trees opposite side of the street from the utility poles, basically, is the basic strategy. I think it's either 6 or 8 feet clearance is the desired clearance from the top of a tree to the high voltage PG&E line, the top line on a utility pole. And so we would be striving to plant species that don't either we have to trim them more regularly, or just plant species that don't grow that high.
I had a question. I saw in the kind of future plan, there was a look at a 10-year inventory of both kind of citywide, but also like zonal level canopy. I was just wondering, in the goals themselves, is there anything around like zone level improvement in cover, or trying to kind of equalize cover across the city?
Yes, thank you. I should have mentioned that. We're very aware of that, and there are inequities in the city, particularly in the area south of Albany Hill. If you kind of go from, say, Jackson Street west towards the freeway and north of Buchanan, that segment of the city is pretty shocking. And Benji, actually, if you could bring up that slide that shows the question, the one that was labeled questions, it shows that. So we're looking at why that exists and what we can do about it. So yeah, if you could just circle that area we were talking about. Yeah. So one of the challenges with that particular neighborhood is the streets are narrower, and many of them don't have sidewalks. So it's more challenging to plant trees in that area, but it's not impossible. It's just more challenging. So we're looking at that by zone. We'll have some metrics by different neighborhoods and then there's also just where do we start with a program. If it's a 10 or 20-year program, where do we start? And I think we would obviously want to start in the places that don't have many street trees.
Yeah, excuse me. I think I recall that different tree species have orders of magnitude differences in emissions of volatile organic compounds that contribute to smog. Is that a factor in this as well?
You're getting way beyond my area of knowledge. So we've looked at, the consultants have looked at kind of the climate benefits, the greenhouse gas capture, the carbon capture. I don't know that they've talked about, and they've also talked about some trees not being, from a health perspective, of allergens and so forth. Some trees may not be good, but in terms of air quality, I don't think we've mentioned that. I'll have to ask them to take that into consideration.
There is a slight mention of VOCs in Chapter 6, I believe. I can't tell you off the top of my head the detail they go into, but they do bring it up as a consideration as they're thinking about species selection.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I missed that.
This might be a question for the consultants, but maybe this goal of increasing from 4 to 5%, benchmark to other cities, is that an ambitious goal, or like an average goal, or like a not that ambitious goal?
I'm not remembering exactly how that would compare with other cities.
Okay.
sometimes it's hard to benchmark those goals because different cities have different densities and street widths and so forth. I would like them to probably answer that. I think they would intuitively know it. I don't have that. I'm sorry.
Thanks. And then in terms of the budget, many budget possibilities for both planting and maintenance, will this plan like include specifics on that?
It will include, in round numbers, yes.
Yeah, okay. Great. And then there are a few points where it's mentioned that the city code could be updated vis-a-vis trees in a few different ways, and I'm wondering too whether this plan will go so far as to like propose some language for that.
It won't, we're not going to attempt to draft the actual ordinance, but it will definitely at, say, kind of a bullet point level of analysis, highlight the key policy aspects that should be in it, which is all we need as staff people to then translate that into an ordinance.
Great.
So I think it will get us more than halfway towards the final language that we'd want to put in the municipal code.
Awesome. Thank you. Any more questions in the room? All right, anyone on public comment?
No public, David Wemmer, go ahead.
Okay. Just wondering, will the final report have recommendations about what species and when we'll start planting them in regards to our changing weather? I mean, if we're heading towards Southern California climate, is our plan gonna start planting like the new natives, which would be from Pomona or San Bernardino, or kind of, how is that transitioning gonna happen? Is it gonna kind of happen over time as the changing weather actually occurs, or anyhow, if we can have that, is the final plan going to kind of address recommendations along those lines?
Thank you. Next is Lucinda Young. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff. Great update. I'm glad to know where we are on the street tree plan. A couple of kind of questions or comments. I know there has been interest in the Albany community in participating in some kind of or partnering with the city on tree planting, and I know the city of Richmond has a community tree program, and the city of Berkeley, I seem to recall reading just recently, they're having a community, or maybe they had a community tree planting day. And I also understand that some years ago, it was probably before I was here in Albany, there was community planting that tree planting that occurred. And I think there is interest now. I know there have been several members of the Albany Climate Action Coalition that have kind of thrown this around. And I'm wondering if there is a role for that, and possibly helping. I know you talked about the increased costs associated, and I'm wondering if that can be reduced somewhat by community engagement, and also just making the community a part of this, making it a partnership. And the other just comment I wanted was I would love to see some private tree protection explored. I know you said that this would not be a part of this plan. I know many cities do have private tree protection ordinances. I know they're difficult balancing the private property owners' rights against the community benefits. But, you know, we do that all the time, and just because it's hard and because there will be some difficult decisions that may come up, I don't think is a reason to not explore it. So I would like to see that possibly as a future agenda item for this committee or Parks and Rec. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I don't see any other hands raised.
All right, any discussion from the committee?
Thank you again for this great analysis. Good to see the updates. I remember, I think the East Palo Alto Urban Forest Plan was a really good template for more of a holistic approach. They include both street trees and the private property and parks. So I would encourage, I think the consultants here did work on that one as well. So in terms of any additional benchmarks could be relevant to looking at that one as well. And I also agree with Dave Wemmernson's comments about the species piece of birds need 70% natives to reproduce. So if we want to have our local bird populations not be decimated by climate change and biodiversity losses, think about how we include native species more in the plan. So I didn't see biodiversity mentioned until goal number 6. It was not in the beginning of the plan as much. So if that's something that we care about, might be worth checking out how to do that. Is it bringing in SoCal species? Is it more local ones that are more drought tolerant, like the oaks? I saw that mentioned as well. So it's good to see thinking about that, and appreciate the community recognition around the private property approach. That's something that I know I personally care about. I think it's really interesting. And then what else? I had this here. So I agree that the city needs to budget for more improvement and maintenance because HRDD funds definitely have some room there to be spent, for what I've seen on that, and excited about being able to use that, if not other funding opportunities. And then encouraging the city to work with local groups. I know ACAC is putting together some street tree planters to remove hardscape and add more trees and native species in certain places. And potentially a mindset shift to think about, we're trying to fit in trees to the hardscape and the landscape. How do we reimagine putting nature more first, and how do we get the infrastructure to work around that? Maybe it's a different kind of figure ground, flipping that around. How do we get the biggest tree in a spot? Maybe we need to remove more concrete or remove more paved area so we can get the benefits from the bigger trees. Thank you.
Just to highlight what Lucinda mentioned in her comment about engaging with local groups, I'm really happy that that's part of the plan, and I would love to see the plan maybe spell it out a little further. So types of events that could be held, what city staff would be responsible for doing those events, hosting those events, and which city staff could be contacting local groups, partnering with local groups. Because, yeah, I think we really should leverage that strength in volunteers. Also, thank you for noting last time I saw in our things that my comment about soil type was in there, which I thank you. But I wanted to go a little further into that and say I'd really like to see in our planting and maintenance plans that we look at amending with compost for these reasons. First, we're required to use compost. The state makes us do it. Second, our soils are very poorly drained on the surface, and it will effectively sponge up moisture from the surface, and we won't have as many problems with local flooding, which would be really great. It increases the water holding capacity of the soil, which means we have to water trees less, which is great for those trees who are not getting a lot of water or care. And increases fertility, which in turn will increase canopy cover even without planting even a single additional tree. You can greatly increase the size of the tree. So for all those reasons, I'd love to see compost in the maintenance and planting plan. And I'd also be curious, I guess this is maybe more of a question, There was a bit here about setting standard sizes for tree wells and planting strips, and that is so important. As you pointed out the last time we learned about this, that's the main factor in the size of our trees, which in turn is the main factor in the size of our canopy. So will the plan kind of not only set standard sizes, but perhaps some recommendations around getting the work done, which I know is a lot of work?
Yes, that would be the intention of where we can expand a tree well.
Yeah.
That would be part of the project. Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, wonderful. And then on the part where it says, add trees into roadway reconstruction projects that involve complete street elements, are we talking there about those streets that have like cycling infrastructure?
Yes, primarily. I mean, those are basically the road projects we do today.
Yeah.
Are bicycle facility related.
Okay,
A lot of our street projects are very, like a slurry seal is simply, it's almost like painting the pavement with kind of an oily mix. Those wouldn't be the kind of projects that we would necessarily want to reconstruct, but if we're essentially reconstructing the street down to the base rock, that's really the best opportunity for us to make more substantial changes. And there's now actually some regional water quality control board regulations that require us to create rain gardens anyhow. So in many respects, we'd be doing this whether we liked it or not, but we do like it. And the idea of identifying as a complete street is just to make it clear, just because we're putting that slurry seal down or restriping or something like that, or patching a few potholes, that wouldn't necessarily trigger the bigger, more expensive projects that say, reconstructing, we're going to be reconstructing Marin, as an example, the upper part of Marin. That would be something where we would take a more careful look at the landscape opportunities, including street trees.
thank you. Other comments?
I just want to mention before we wrap up, we are planning to do some community engagement on a couple of different plans in May. There's a lot of overlap and interest in both the work we're doing for the street tree management plan and the active transportation plan, so stay tuned for an announcement soon on that. I think that will be a really important opportunity for people to engage directly with our consultant teams, both teams, and maybe more informally, so there's a lot more Q&A and discussion back and forth rather than sometimes the more formality of this room where you get your 3 minutes and get that follow-up question answered. So stay tuned for that. We're probably a few days away from making kind of public announcements about the date and venue, but we're getting real close to that.
Thank you so much. We love trees.
Thank you
Much
for
appreciated.
giving me your time this evening.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right, I'm looking to the time. Usually we take a break around this time. Maybe this is the best time. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So we're going to take a 5-minute break. It is 7:54, so we'll be back at 7:59. Reconvening at 8 o'clock, the Climate Action Committee, and we're looking at item 4.2, a presentation about tri-transit.
That's right. And I actually don't have any PowerPoint slides for this one because it's a fairly short and simple presentation. But, you know, this is kind of branching off of some discussions that we had at the end of last year regarding ways to increase active transit, and then also kind of bouncing off of that, ways to increase public transit in the city. And, you know, a few different kind of ideas came up related to that. I think public transit in particular is, you know, we'll see in a moment, kind of an item for us to focus on because we've seen a real decrease in public transit usage in the last few years, really stemming from the COVID pandemic. A lot of people stopped using transit and didn't restart. And so especially on BART, but also with, you know, the bus services and all these kinds of things, we've seen a real dip in transit ridership. So that said, one of the ideas that came from the committee as a way to try to encourage more transit ridership was the concept of a tri-transit program, which is a program that exists in Contra Costa County. It's a county-run program. And in my searches, I also found out that there's a very, very similar program in San Mateo County. Basically, the way that these programs work is they offer prepaid transit passes for $25. That's what both of them do, to essentially new transit users. So, you know, people sign up and they say, I don't use transit right now, but I'm interested in trying it out. They get this free $25 pass, and it just kind of gives them a risk-free way to give it a shot. And it's a one-time incentive, so it's not subsidizing the cost of transit for them, but it's really just trying to create that introduction. And then they complete a survey, basically, to provide data for the program. The data that I do have about it is that the Contra Costa program started back in 2015, so 10 years ago, and it has grown in popularity. It started with about 100 users per year, and now they're giving away about 800 of these prepaid cards per year. So it has grown in popularity, and according to their survey, 90% of respondents said that they were more likely to continue using transit after they received the card. That said, I didn't get clear data on like how many of the users actually responded to the survey, and like, you know, it's not completely clear how solid that number is, or like how much we can trust, like how many of those people are actually using transit all the time now. Not sure, but 90% is still pretty impressive. So, you know, something to be said for that. Like I said, it is a county-run program, so, you know, it's a larger scale than we would have here, but in terms of the kind of logistics of creating a program like this, it's fairly simple. It's not something that would have to be done at a county level necessarily. You know, in terms of cost, talking about $25 cards, it's not a hugely expensive program, and it could potentially be limited in the number of these prepaid cards that are given away each year, or and who exactly is eligible. So, you know, it's a relatively simple type of program to set up. Exactly the kind of scale of impact it would have, hard to say exactly for sure. You know, how many people would be using transit if they just had a chance to try it risk-free? I don't really know. I think that's kind of a policy decision for you all to think about. And maybe there's ways that we could try to get some data on that. But I'm not sure there is a clear answer out there, maybe. But yeah, so this presentation, like I said, very short, just kind of talking about what these programs are, giving you a chance to discuss whether it seems like something that's worth pursuing further, whether it's, you know, where it lies in terms of priority for city spending. If it does seem like a worthy program, no need to make a decision on it tonight, but I think basically the committee in this session can decide, whether it's something that you want to pursue trying to work on, and then what the best route for that would be. So I'll stop there and answer any questions.
You remind me, I really need to have this tattoo on my hand. There's a magic dollar amount or range where a project is small enough to sort of be something that staff can just decide to do without going through the multi-year budget process.
Yeah, there's not exactly a magic number. So, there are things that we can do within our department budget, which, there's not exactly a magic number for that. It kind of depends on what the budget looks like. Our director, Jeff, does have the authority to sign off on $10,000, but that's more for contracts rather than full-on programs. Whereas if we're trying to do something that's just within our department budget, spending $2,000 or $3,000 is usually something that we can manage, something small scale like that. That said, I think a program like this would need to go through council. It wouldn't be something that we just do by ourselves. But in terms of getting the money to do that, it's easier if it's kind of on that in the few $1,000s range. That's the kind of thing that usually you're able to kind of find a squishy zone in the budget to pull some money out of.
And then I also wonder if you have a sense of the staff time that would be required to process surveys and distribute these things.
Yeah, I think if we did this, it'd basically be creating some sort of system with our finance department staff to purchase a certain number of prepaid cards. And then there would be some sort of logistical setup to distribute them to the users. That might be by mail, or they'd have to come pick it up at City Hall. So there would be some staff time required for just getting the cards into people's hands. Surveys, that's all just setting up a Google form or something. That's easy. And then I think one of the bigger staff time requirements, if we're going to try to make the program successful, is outreach and making sure that people know about it. That would probably be one of the larger pieces of work.
If we were to pursue this at a county level, do you have a sense of which group, I guess, in Alameda County government we'd work with to try to do this?
Yeah, sorry, one sec, let me. So the Tri-Transit program at Contra Costa County is apparently funded through the Air District. And there's similar funding that's being used by our Alameda County CTC, which stands for County Transportation Commission. They're using that funding for some other active transportation programming. So yeah, in theory, the CTC could run a similar program. There are some other agencies that theoretically could do something like that. But I think that would be the first one to come to mind.
I wonder if it's fair to assume that the Alameda County's CTC considered this sort of program and opted to spend the money on this other In other words, have they already done an analysis of the pros and cons of this tri-transit for Alameda County?
I have no idea. That's a great question. I could probably try to get in touch with someone over there and see. I doubt that kind of information would be something I could search up online, but it might be that there's someone on staff there that could, who say, this is what we're using air district funds for and why we're not using it for X, Y, or Z. Yeah, I'd have to look into it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Any public comment?
Cindy Young, please go ahead.
Yes, I do think that it would be a good use of funds to encourage public transit. An important part of the climate action and adaptation plan is a reduction in vehicles miles traveled. I'm wondering, Michelle, and I actually missed the first part of your presentation, so I apologize if you went over this, but is this for both AC Transit and BART? I'm also wondering, is the thinking that this would just be given to encourage people to just try it, or are we thinking of making it available just to low to moderate income, having income eligibility for it? So I just, and again, I missed the first couple minutes of your presentation, so I'm sorry if you went over that. Thank you.
Not seeing any other hands this time.
I can respond to those questions. So, in theory, we could design a program however we want. I think logistically, it makes the most sense to provide a prepaid Clipper card that would provide access to any of the public transit programs in the Bay that use Clipper, which is almost all of them. So yes, it would cover BART and ACT in that case. And I think that makes the most sense probably. And then in terms of income eligibility, that would be a policy decision in the sort of program design phase. I think there's an argument to be made that it's worth making it an income eligible program and that, we should reserve the money for the people who need it most. The downside of that, as always, is that requiring income eligibility is a lot more work because you have to verify that. And it can turn people off who, don't want to provide income documentation, especially if it's for something like $25. It's, I think it could potentially really reduce the impact of the program in terms of, getting it out to people that are interested. So, it's up for determination. There's also middle grounds in place. It could be a higher amount of money for income eligible folks, but if you don't want to verify your income, you can still get the base amount of 25 or something. So there are different options, but.
Does anyone have any further comments or discussion?
A couple quick comments. In the book called Hooked by Nir Eyal, he talks about the science of habit formation. So how do we think about making habits we want people to do, like trying transit, which is really key to reducing VMT and getting more people to drive less, to do this. And I think lowering the barrier to trying transit, I think is a really good start. And because when people think about getting somewhere, having a free card that's preloaded, like it's a really salient, it's not a lot of money, but it's a very salient thing for people to think, oh, I got free stuff, I got to use it. The endowment effect is a behavioral psychology or behavioral economics concept that people will overvalue things they already have. So this is really smart psychology, it's smart economics, and it's good for the planet. So I think there's a lot of good things behind this. And then in terms of logistics, I agree with income eligibility being nice in theory, but in practice it's hard and annoying. And one idea I have to get people to try this who wouldn't otherwise try it, like people who have 2 cars, would be people who move to Albany using real estate data for people to buy a house and then sending them a card. Maybe not solely because the income people who need it are in that category, but people move to a place, giving them an incentive to try a new habit. That's like the key moment for them to develop new habits, because people who have more money tend to travel more with cars and with planes. So the people we need to influence aren't low-income folks because the bus system is more affordable than having a car. People who drive a lot already are the ones we need to influence more than people who are actually lower income.
I like that idea, only I would expand it to find some way of finding who's moved here and is renting, since that's half of residents. And I'm really excited about this. I'm also a little cognizant of time and how we have a very important presentation yet to come. So I'd like to maybe come back with a proposal of some kind, but to a future meeting. Not necessarily to wrap up discussion, though, if other people have other comments.
Yeah, I'll just say, I would definitely support that, continuing in another meeting with committee brought proposal. Yeah, it sounds promising, pretty low effort, and, could be a good experiment just to see what type of traction we get. And yeah, I'd like to explore further.
Okay. So that concludes item 4.2. And we're on to the big item. Before we start with item 5.1, I'm curious if Zero Emission Transportation Subcommittee has a presentation today, and if Heat Pump Rebate Subcommittee has a presentation today.
We can also do the short stuff first and the bigger stuff later, no? Or when the short stuff at the end?
I mean, I'm fine. Well, I want to make sure we budget the right amount of time. It's
Maybe 5 minutes or less for our subcommittee for
Okay.
heat pumps.
all right.
Yep, and yeah, nothing on the transportation
Okay.
subcommittee.
Super. So we have lots of time. All right. So we're on to 5.1, which is the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan Key Performance Indicator Report. Hooray.
Okay, great. This will be me and Benji. He's got another half of a presentation tonight. And get ready for a whole lot of charts. I'll try to stick to the meaning behind them. Next slide, please, Benji. Okay, so top line numbers are 2023 citywide emissions total was 49,560 metric tons of CO2, or 2.29 tons per capita. Emissions by source looks very similar to how it has in the years past. 50% was from transportation, and then almost another 50% from natural gas in buildings, and then teeny weeny bit from electricity and a little bit from off-road emissions and waste. So about the same pie graph that we see every year. Transportation is just slightly more than it was before. We also saw a slight uptick in natural gas, really small, and a small reduction in all of the other categories since last year. There we go. And in terms of the overall trend line, this is a reduction from 2022, so that's great news. Not a huge dip, but a slight one. This graph is an interesting one. So the blue line here is what our cap goal looks like if we just spread it out evenly from year to year. And the orange line is the emissions we're actually seeing. So we are still ahead of our targets. That said, we had this massive drop in 2020, which of course surprises no one. Everyone was just staying home and not doing anything, right? And then it bumps back up, but it didn't go back to the 2019 level, right? It kind of it seems to me like we've been sort of like slowly catching back up to where we would have been at this point in 2023 if COVID hadn't happened, basically. But at the same time, if we look at the last couple of years, that downward trend line is almost flat, right? So what exactly do we make of it? Are we still in the COVID hangover? Is this sort of catching up to where we were and now we're gonna kind of get back on the track we were at? Or are we actually slowing down with our progress, right? It's a little bit hard to say, and really the majority of this question comes down to transportation and VMT, which is why public transit's obviously a big thing to think about. There was a really big shift where people stopped driving and just sat in their living rooms, right? And then after that, a lot of people continued staying home and working from home, but a lot of people started going back to work and started taking cars instead of taking transit. And so those two have kind of leveled each other out, and it's still kind of unclear where we're gonna see that trend move in the future. And I think that's really gonna have a big impact on whether we start going back down at the same rate or if we start to flatten even more here. And of course, if you look at that blue curve, you know, the goals that we set in the CAP said that we were gonna start reducing emissions at a faster rate starting in 2020. And so, you know, we need to pick up the pace if we're gonna keep going with that. We can't just go back to our old emissions rate. You know, we have to actually go faster. So that's kind of the big picture here. Next slide, please. This is a similar way of saying the same, or a different way of saying the same thing, kind of breaking things out by category. And, you know, as you can see, there's sort of these periods where there are big shifts. In particular, the electricity data, which is the purple. I mean, you can barely see it this year, right? Once we switched over to Ava Community Energy, there was just this huge drop off in that. And then, you know, the transportation data, again, like I said, there's this big drop, it goes back up, and now we're starting to sort of flatten out with that. While we're on the topic of kind of overall emissions, I'll bring up our consumptions-based emissions inventory. I did talk about this last year, but I know we have a slightly different makeup of our committee now. So this is a different way of calculating emissions. The sort of standard process we use is that we look at all of the carbon that goes from the city of Albany's, you know, 1 square mile up into the air, right? All of the gas that's coming out of our tailpipes and out of our furnaces, and, you know, the waste that we're producing in the city that's going to our landfill, that sort of thing, right? And that's really just one small piece of the emissions that Albany residents are responsible for. You know, if we think about all of the carbon emissions that go into creating the t-shirt that I'm wearing, sending it, you know, to 16 different countries, and then finally here to the US, all of the emissions it'll create once it's thrown away, like really thinking about that whole life cycle and all of the emissions that aren't happening here in Albany, but that I'm sort of causing by buying the shirt, right? So that's the consumption-based inventory, and it is quite a bit higher in terms of overall emissions. I said, you know, our emissions that we use our standard calculation for was about 50,000, and in 2015, the calculation, this is the most recent calculation that was done, it estimated about 300,000 for the city of Albany, right? So 6 times higher. So really a significant difference there. This isn't something that we calculate every year, obviously, because it's kind of impossible to do that. And it's really hard to see if we're making progress because it's so, you know, you can't really pin it down for the most part. So this is kind of the best data that we have, but it is just important to think about it every year when we talk about this and think about, okay, what are we doing to address these sort of phantom emissions that we know are really impactful? Okay, so Moving into the weeds a little bit more here, I'm going to talk about building emissions. Like I said, this makes up about 40% of our total emissions in the city. Residential gas makes up 40%. Electricity is a much smaller percentage now. And last year, 2023, we saw about a 2% increase in natural gas emissions. Based on our preliminary data for this year, it looks like there was a massive decline in 2024, about 14%. We'll have to confirm that for next year. Can't say for sure, but based on the electricity data we have, it's pretty similar, so I think it might be true. Most of these massive changes are really just due to weather. It can really swing a lot year to year sometimes. I mean, you can see in 2013, there was this huge drop. Weather has a big effect on these things, but we are seeing an overall decline, especially since about 2019. There's sort of this downward trend. And I do think that at least some of that is related to energy efficiency and electrification in homes. I was actually just looking at the numbers earlier, and just based on the number of heat pumps and heat pump water heaters we know have been installed since 2020, if you just look at the residential gas data we have, it's about equivalent with what we would expect the emissions reductions to be from all of those heat pumps installed. How much of that is like, okay, the weather went up and whatever. You can't really parse these things that well. But, we're seeing this overall decline. We know that we are starting to electrify a lot of buildings. There is a connection there. Electricity is a little bit different. So obviously you can see the spike in 2020 when everyone's staying at home. Since then, we've kind of gotten back into our normal sort of flattening decline that we've had in the last few years. But again, 2024, we did see a pretty significant drop in usage. That may also be weather related. Yes, Mark?
Is that the carbon emissions attributed to that electricity or the actual?
No, that's the kilowatt hours.
It's dropped that much?
Yeah, so, we saw a really big drop. I'm not sure exactly why. Could be a weather-related thing, especially as we have more people who are doing heating and water heating with electricity. You can start seeing more weather-related changes. And, there's more efficient appliances out there, all these things. We do kind of expect at some point that we'll see more electrical usage once people electrify more, but also they're much more efficient appliances, so it's a little bit hard to know how it's all going to come out in the wash. The emissions of these kilowatt hours is incredibly low because the majority of the city is now on Renewable 100. There's very, very little emissions from all the electricity use. Next slide, please. Speaking of electrification, we've made pretty significant strides in terms of the popularity of heat pumps and heat pump water heaters in the city. Last year, 76% of all of our HVAC permits were for heat pumps and 39% for water heaters. So that's pretty exciting. We got over 75%, so I'm pretty psyched about that. And as you can see, since 2020, it's really just been this kind of massive rise, especially for the HVAC systems. I'll note 2025 has a dip down there. That's just for our data so far this year. So, these things are somewhat seasonal. I'm expecting that to even out a bit. But also, you can see that there is a bit of a rise and fall. And if you look at the monthly data, it gets even crazier looking, and a lot of that has to do with rebate availability. So, we see that there's a couple of months where the TUC program or the HERA program is available, and there's this huge spike, and then it drops back down. So, those kinds of factors are definitely still making an impact. And it can make things look a little bit crazy, but we are definitely seeing heat pumps in particular, again, for HVACs becoming sort of the standard here in Albany. Also seeing a lot of solar installations. We have over 3,000 kilowatt hours that have been installed since 2016. We're seeing more battery storage being installed, EV chargers, all these kinds of things. And now I'm going to let Benji take over.
Yeah, so first, right off the bat, running back towards the VMT, which we spoke about a bit, or Michelle brought up a bit earlier, vehicle miles traveled. In 2022, we saw that increase past the 2019 level, around the high 60 to 70 million, I believe, miles range. And then in 2023, we saw that a similar increase, but at a lower rate and more of a leveling out around that 70 million mile level. And so seeing potentially what might be sort of a resting spot around that 70 million miles as of right now. Of course, this is something that we're thinking might be affected by those accessibility to programs like the Tri-Transit program that Michelle spoke about earlier. Thinking a lot about how transportation, specifically when it comes to like the vehicle miles traveled per person per day, how that might be affected by incentives and programs such as that. At the same time, we have seen an overall decrease in emissions per mile by 11% since 2015. So while vehicle miles are increasing slightly, according to 2023, we are seeing an overall emissions decrease over time. Looking at how like BART ridership and ACT ridership are affected slightly, with the AC Transit ridership, it's continued to increase slowly to just over 50% of 2019 levels, seeing a bit of growth this year after a somewhat stagnant 2023. The growth in ridership was due mostly entirely, or almost entirely, to the construction of a new student housing building in the University Village, which significantly increased the popularity of the 52 line to the UC Berkeley's campus. And then thinking about electric vehicles, in 2020, EVs made up roughly 6% of the vehicle population and 14% of vehicle sales, versus in 2023, those numbers increased to 11% and 31% respectively. So a pretty significant difference. And then when we think about EVs as a percent of the vehicle population, we can see that Albany's trend is higher than state and county levels, which is a strong indicator. It's objectively a good sign that Albany is ahead of the trend as well as performing really well. And these trends overall can highlight the growing affordability of EVs, charger availability, and then the effectiveness of state and regional EV incentive programs. Moving over towards waste, following 2020, waste has followed a somewhat consistent decline overall, while organics and recycling have fluctuated somewhat. And so in recent years, we've seen that very steady decrease in landfill waste, while recycling and organics have sort of balanced around the same area for the last decade or so. So it's really a good sign, based on this chart at least, that landfill has followed like a general trend. And the fact that organics and recycling are somewhat dynamic is encouraging, that they're still showing potential to have a large increase at any moment, but seeing the decline in landfill is one of the biggest takeaways. When it comes to the waste mix, residents landfilled a record low of 1.12 pounds of waste per person in 2023, and that was just a slight increase to 1.13 pounds in 2024 per person. So really, really similar distribution in that waste mix between 2023 and 2024. So that also demonstrates that sort of consistent trend over the last couple of years. Looking at municipal stats, that first graph that you see, that's natural gas and electricity emissions by municipal buildings. That orange portion of it, the electricity emissions, you can see where it drops off. That's when we became a part of EBCE, correct? Oh, AVA now. Yeah, sorry, forgive me. The renewable 100, and so that's why it goes away pretty much entirely. So as a result, there's a large decrease in building emissions overall. That being said, we are seeing a slight increase in natural gas emissions in municipal buildings in 2023. It's very slight, but it is there, so an increase is an increase, so important to note. And then with that as well, when it comes to waste, municipal waste, we saw a 3% increase in 2024. So it's still staying within, like pretty close by to what we saw in 2023, but an increase nonetheless. And the good part about it is that despite this increase, organics remained at their record high of 22% of the waste stream. So although we're seeing a slight increase in waste overall for municipal buildings, it's not correlating to a decrease in the amount of organics being reduced, or organic waste. I'll say that.
All right, I'll take back over here. So I shared with you all a spreadsheet of all of the actions in the CAP and a sort of status update on each of those. I will not take all of our time by going through each one, but I've just got a few highlights here. So that first one should be in progress, but we are in the progress of developing a new active transportation plan. That's, well underway. We also have been continuing to implement the existing active transportation plan, and there's been a lot of active transit infrastructure put in place in the last few years. We also finished amending the zoning ordinance to require higher density development. That was done, I believe, last year. EV action plan is in progress. That's something that we haven't really formalized, but the committee a few years ago sort of created an informal version and has been working through some of the highest priorities in that informal plan. Obviously in progress of working on ways to convert existing buildings to all electric energy. We talked about that just last month, a constant thing that we're working on. And then we have our ongoing incentive program for electrification, which is our rebate program. We also have our induction cooktop program as well. The sustainable foodware ordinance is of course complete as of a few months ago. We are constantly finding new ways to promote and facilitate sharing, repair, reuse economy through events and outreach. And of course, we're also in progress and nearly finished with the street tree management plan. So some of the big highlights, but happy to talk about any of the details of that spreadsheet afterwards. It's okay. And then, just in terms of kind of overall thoughts, conclusions, I say every year that this is a good way to remind ourselves that transportation and natural gas are really the two big things that we need to think about in terms of emissions, but also that our consumption-based emissions are pretty important too. We know a lot of the actions we need to take. We're doing our best to take them, and we always have to work harder and faster, But it's always helpful to kind of get a sense of, what are maybe the pressure points or what are the issues that are becoming a little bit more kind of important right now, right? So one of the things I said is the emissions themselves have returned to the sort of pre-pandemic level that we would have expected with the previous trend, but our actual rate of reductions has been slowing the past few years, so need to kind of figure out what's happening there. Transportation really seems like a key to that. And of course, transportation and buildings make up the biggest share of emissions. Our VMT has been rising. That's really something to think about. I think the public transit and the active transit, we're really seeing not a reduction necessarily, but we just haven't recovered in the way that we need to. And we're hoping that the ATP helps with that, but like we said, public transit definitely needs to recover, and there's been region-wide and, of course, nationwide issues related to that. There is some promising data on EV adoption and landfill reduction. You know, we've seen kind of continuous good news on that front. Obviously, these things can happen faster, but, you know, we are moving in a good direction there. And then, you know, a lot of these metrics they're tricky because there's sort of these massive things and the data is sort of estimated, and how much of it do we have an impact on as a small city? You know, a lot of that stuff is hard, but there are things where we can see, like, okay, we created a policy or a program and we saw that it had an impact. And I think like electrification is one of those things where we've really seen like this has changed. The market has changed when it comes to heat pumps, and our rebate program has helped with that. And of course, other things have too. But, you know, so there are places there where we can really see that we've had an impact. I think that the foodware ordinance is one where I'm hopeful that we'll really get to see an impact in waste in a few years, and we'll see more organics and less landfill, right? So there are places there where we can really see an impact, and that's helpful. And then also in terms of our goals, most of the CAP goals are in progress or complete, which is great news. I will say, like, a lot of those in progress goals are things that like we're just going to keep doing for the next 20 years, right? And like it's just always in progress, or, you know, it's technically in progress, but there's still a lot of work to be done. So I don't want to pretend that we've just finished the CAP and everything's great, but we have completed some big things, and there's a lot of stuff that we're working on and making good progress on. So that's all good news too. Always good to end it on a happy note, even when we're dealing with some big problems. But I'll stop there and answer any questions.
Is it possible to present a graph of vehicle miles traveled by gasoline-powered vehicles?
Great question. The answer is sort of. So the vehicle mile travel data that we have is from Google, and it does not differentiate by vehicle type. So it's just vehicle miles overall. That said, the emissions data that we use comes from something called MFAC, or emissions factor, and they actually separate, they basically do like a county-wide estimate every year of what percentage of miles are by, you know, gas passenger vehicles, gas hybrid vehicles, gas electric, and then trucks and all these different kinds. And those are all sort of calculated out to figure out that on average per vehicle mile, this is the emissions factor you have. So, you know, in theory, I could go in there and say, okay, this is the percentage that's EV miles in the county, and then let's, you know, multiply that by our VMT and get a mileage number. So I could do that, but also like that number is inside of our transportation emissions data. Yeah.
I'm curious. I happened to see the other day that Albany has 3,800 single-family homes. I'm wondering how many private automobiles are owned by Albany residents. Do you have any idea at all? It's off the wall question, but I'm curious.
Yeah, I think we have that somewhere. You know, I don't have it pulled up right now, but during the public comment, I can find that number for you. I think we have a population or a vehicle per person number somewhere.
Okay, what I'm going for is how many of the 3,800 homes already have heat pumps, and how many cars are there that could conceivably be switched to EVs somewhere? So where could we get the most bang? We can get to the for the buck later, but for the bang.
Yeah, I'll look. Yeah.
I have a question about the consumption-based emission. So that was a Bay Area-wide analysis?
Yeah, so it was done by a group at UC Berkeley. I'm not sure if it was just Alameda County or the whole Bay. It might have been the whole Bay. They basically created a method to calculate for each city what the emissions number was. And they used some different pieces of data. The biggest thing that they used was like the average income in a city, and that was used as a proxy for consumption. How accurate that is hard to say, and it's basically like there won't be any differences that show up unless we start making less money, right? Even if we're making good choices, like it doesn't show up in the model. And so like, is Albany better than they think we are because everybody here is making good purchasing decisions, or they're purchasing less than they need because they're trying to be, So it is specific to Albany in terms of the calculation that they did, but it's also very much like a proxy.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Any more questions here?
Another one. At the last meeting, we talked about the Bay Area NOx regulations, and there was a meeting at the Bay Area District, I think it was like April 9th, to consider amending the rule. Have you heard anything about what happened at that meeting? I have not.
No, I didn't hear about that, but thanks for noting it. I will look into that. I will say, I know that the rule itself is like, it's amendment to Rule 7.6 or something. It's like the way that they refer to it, because there was a rule existing beforehand that they then amended to what it is now. So it's possible that could be it, but it also is totally possible that they're thinking about amending something else.
What I read from the announcement was that they were considering different ways to implement, or maybe delays because of the difficulty of getting enough electricians and stuff like that.
Okay, I will look into that. Thank you.
We have public commenters.
Lucinda Young, please go ahead.
Thanks, Michelle and Benji. Great presentation. I remember hearing this last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, and I'm always really interested to hear, results of all the work that you're doing and we're all doing together. A couple of things I wanted to note. I think I was really happy to see that 76% of our HVACs that were installed in 2024 were heat pumps. I think that is really terrific and much higher than I was even expecting. And I think it's also notable, though, that heat pump water heaters, though, which are significantly less expensive than HVACs, and also much less complicated to install. We only had, I wrote this down right, about 30% of our new hot water heaters were heat pumps. So I think that's kind of curious, and I'm wondering how much it is the fact that there were not any rebates. Albany's for the heat pump hot water heaters. The HERA is only for HVACs, and Albany's is only for HVAC. So I think that's something to think about. And I know we've had some discussion here about extending rebates to heat pump hot water heaters. So something to think about. Also on the EV action plan, we've talked about it in here. We really need more public chargers, and we've talked about that some here. I've talked about it at City Council, and I think that's a real missing piece in Albany is EV chargers, public EV chargers. Another comment I just had to make is, looks good that we're on target, although it is concerning that things have flattened out some. My kind of sort of pulse, when I take the pulse of public, I think some people are just tuning out to the climate problem. They've heard it, they've just kind of desensitized. And I'm hoping that's not what's happening, but I am wondering if that might explain why we're flattening out. One other just brief comment. I see waste only makes up for 4%, which isn't much. But our new waste management contract eliminated the 10-pound, for Albany, eliminated the 10-pound containers, which just 20 pounds is now the minimum, and that just discourages people from reducing waste. And the contract probably can't be changed at this point, but on a future basis, we need to encourage people to reduce waste. So why did we discontinue the 10-pound? Thank you.
No other public comment?
Comments and discussion from the committee?
Start. Great work. Good to see a lot of improvements here. It makes sense that the rate has slowed because as you make changes in any kind of new thing, things get harder over time. So we had to really reimagine things more deeply to get to the next level of, I think, reductions. And I really like the idea of the EV charging community center. I like maybe e-bike vouchers, because if the problem now is getting the last people who haven't done anything differently, how do we continue to make active and public transit more enticing than the alternative? And safety and infrastructure and biking and walking is a key thing. It's easy to have like a voucher, which is a good start, but thinking about how do we continue to think about infrastructure in a way that prioritizes people walking, biking, rolling over cars, if we make changes to that. And I think the initiatives that are in schools around school drop-offs using bike buses or walking buses or things that help get people to do that in a way they're not always in their cars. And then in terms of, again, changing hearts and minds and raising awareness, the community center is the heart of the community, right, the definition. So having induction stoves there and EV charging there could be a logical place to put things, because people go there for the library, for programs, for events, for all these different things. And the induction cooked lending program is the opposite of the gas stoves at the community center that we're teaching people to cook on. So it's a kind of opposite thing we can do there, to have a small pilot even of having portable induction cooktops with a chef who's trained on induction, because right now the current one is not. And yeah, anyway, great work and got more to do.
I just want to say thank you for doing all of this analysis and bringing it every year. It's really helpful, like helps us all focus on what we need to focus on. Honestly, that's my main thing, is appreciation. Thank you.
I can also share the vehicle population data if you guys want to see that really quickly. Yeah, just pulled it up real quick here. This is a chart of vehicles per person, and we're just under half of a vehicle per person. Of course, that includes kids and stuff, but so not bad, actually. Quite a bit better than county and statewide levels. But sort of similar trend where it goes down in COVID, goes back up, and then kind of resumes the old trend.
So we have 20,000 people in Albany roughly, so this is telling us there's a little less than 10,000 private vehicles in Albany.
Yeah, that's right.
And then, boy, this goes to Lucinda's comment. From looking at a representative house, it seems to me that converting to an EV produces significantly more savings than putting in a space heater heat pump, like 30% more. And there's a lot more cars. So focus, and right now, the operating cost of an EV is lower than the operating cost of a gasoline vehicle. You know, it's cents per mile. So it really says to me that EVs should be a real major area of focus.
Mm-hmm.
For heat pumps right now, the math is the other way. The PG&E's rate has gotten so much higher so quickly that operating heat pump actually costs more than just heating your home with a gas furnace.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, based on the analysis I've done, I think the kind of repayment is similar to what you're saying. It's definitely, you're going to make your money back faster with an EV, and you might not be making savings at all with a heat pump, depending on the house. Yeah, I think it's a policy decision in terms of like, what does that mean about where we should prioritize as a city? But yeah, I think the math is definitely right there.
Unless you have solar, though. If people have solar, then they have the heat pump savings.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and also we should, I think, not always posit that the only alternative to a gas-powered car is an EV. You could take a bus, you could take your bike, you could take your e-bike. I don't want to forget about those options and forget about promoting those options, all of which are preferable emissions-wise. Other comments? All right. That was awesome. Thank you so much. We have 5 minutes left, so I think I'm going to move that we extend the time, but just a bit. I think we only need 10 additional minutes and could adjourn at 9:10. So that's my proposal.
Second.
Okay. Member Bierce?
Yes.
Member Hodges?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
And Chair Hill McClanahan?
Yes. All right, so heat pump rebate subcommittee update.
Where do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just share out that Catherine and Michelle and I met to talk about some of the goals for the committee and yeah, kind of how we want to take this forward. Some of the things we were talked about reflected in the updates today, in that we were seeing, that heat pumps have really reached an inflection point. And we're looking at the numbers, and it looked like actually only around 25% of those who had permits were applying for the incentive. So it seems like they're, you can fact check me if that's right or not, but so it seems like even though there's data showing that the program is still effective for those who used it, we've reached a point in the adoption where there are a lot of people who are just kind of doing this on their own. So that was kind of one thing we talked about, how if there might not be strong evidence to expand the heat pump HVAC program itself, if it's starting to kind of take off in the market, and there could be other ways we could use the funds. That said, we also looked at heat pump water heaters and saw that, as we saw in the numbers today, there is still a lot we could do there. So that was one thing we kind of cemented, that we still really want to focus on how we could look at heat pump water heater adoption and start doing research on things like price gaps and other ways we can, basically how we can get the most leverage out of an incentive program.
One other thing that was interesting to note is that I was asking questions to Michelle in the meeting around, do we prioritize more rebates or other things like community center type projects? And one thing that was a news piece to me was that one of the value adds for having a rebate program is the simplicity. It only takes one person to be able to run the program versus maybe some of the more complex, potentially higher value add, but potentially similar value add are like electrification. The community center is more complex because of multiple departments involved. So the issue of complexity and the lack of visibility around how much work it takes to collaborate was something that was news to me that I think is worth noting.
I'll just say, still in progress. I'm in research phase right now, but looking to come back soon with some concrete recommendations on, reshaping the program and potential expansion to heat pump water heaters.
Can I ask a question? So the rebates that we have now, people apply for those rebates as part of the permitting process, yeah? Or?
It's technically a separate step. It's not part of the permitting process. You have to get a permit in order to be eligible for a rebate.
Yeah.
But getting a permit by itself does not mean that you get a rebate.
So are the individuals who are presently utilizing the rebates, do you interface as staff mostly with contractors employed by those individuals or with the homeowners?
It can depend. Usually I'm interfacing with homeowners. but sometimes it's contractors. Either one can fill out the application form. The check goes directly to the homeowner, so there's at least some sort of communication with them. I'd say that's the most common. Thanks.
Any other questions about the heat pump rebates? I guess I'm only asking Mark because everyone else already knows. No? Okay, thank you guys. That's great. Wonderful. Okay, then we're on to announcements.
We sometimes do public comment, like a short public comment for this period.
Oh,
We don't have to, I think, but
We got time. Let's do some like 1 minute public comments if anyone has comments on the heat pump rebates.
It's like no public comment.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So announcements, yes. So from now on, the announcements and the future agenda items are one section. So I'm going to do announcements first, and then we'll have public comment and then future agenda item requests. So just a few announcements. We've got lots of events coming up now that it's springtime. It's almost Earth Day, of course. I think I mentioned last month that there are a few events that were shared by member Bierce. So the Home Electrification Fair in downtown Berkeley. That's April 19th coming up. There's also Electrification Fair in Alameda at Faction Brewing on May 3rd. The East Bay Green Home Tours are coming up on June 7th. And then there's also an event here in Albany this weekend, a Bon Marché, which is a secondhand market. I'll be there and tabling to tell everybody about the foodware ordinance. So come by and say hi. And then we also have our citywide garage sale coming up on May 3rd. The registration window is closing this Friday. So spread the word if anyone else wants to register. We have a lot of people though, so no shortage. I think we've got like 50 or 60 registered right now, so a very big crowd. And then just a seasonal reminder about the Compost Hub, which is open every Sunday from 12 to 4. Now that it's time to plant your gardens, go and get some free compost.
Nice. And some other events that are happening, not so much in the East Bay, but more in San Francisco, some regionally. SF Climate Week is sfclimateweek.org. There are 500 events happening for Earth Week, so some are online, a lot of them are in person, so check it out.
Okay, so now we're going to do public comment on the announcements, but maybe also in this period, if you are a public commenter and you're requesting future agenda items, this is the time to do so.
1 minute.
Sure. 2 minutes. Let's do 2 minutes.
Lucinda Young, please go ahead.
Yes, I have a couple of suggestions for future agenda items. There had been some discussion a few meetings ago, I believe it was in maybe December, about e-bike rebates. And I wanted to revisit that. At that time, California Air Resources Board, I believe it was KALB, offered the e-bike rebates. And it was for fairly low-income people. Those rebates went very, very quickly. The portal opened and closed within an hour, and they are reopening the rebates, I believe, either in the near future. They put out an announcement they're reopening them, but a very fixed amount of funds available. There's a huge, huge demand for e-bikes, far, far more than the supply of funds. So I would ask that that be considered, and I agree with committee member Flanahan, who mentioned our solution. We've got a big transportation problem. We've got to reduce our emissions from transportation. EVs are part of the solution. EVs, converting all of our gas cars to EVs is not the solution. It's a multifaceted solution, and we need to remember that EVs far superior to gas cars, but they still require a huge amount of carbon emissions to manufacture. And they require a huge amount of emissions and also cost of maintaining all the infrastructure to support cars, whether those cars are gas or electric. A second future agenda item, we need EV chargers. So we've got one public EV charger in our city, and it's especially difficult for people who are living in apartments. Thank you.
No other public comment.
Thank you, Lucinda. Okay, on the committee, what future agenda item requests do we have?
I want to second Lucinda's comments on the e-bike rebates and EV chargers, given that nutrition is half of our emissions. Seems to be the biggest thing to go after for the next batch of reductions.
I'd like to return to the tri-transit with some sort of proposal around that. Oh, and I'm also excited about the e-bike rebates. I feel like Dan had a piece of information about that a few meetings ago.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and remind myself, but I believe Ava has an e-bike program that's launching at some point soon, and we were talking about maybe trying to connect with that, but I'd have to go back and remind myself.
It is what it is. Thank you. Other requests for future meeting?
One small thing out of the Zero Emissions Transportation Subcommittee, we did meet with Michelle last month and talked about a number of topics, but did reaffirm our interest in the multifamily level 1 charging program as one of the key ways we think to promote EV charging access. So I'm not sure what form that'll take yet for an agenda item, but I think coming up soon we get to talk about that again.
All right. Is that everything? Thank you, everyone. That was an awesome meeting. All right. We'll adjourn at 9:07.